In 1947, the partition of British India into two newly formed independent nations proved to be a profoundly cataclysmic event, plagued by violence, death, and deep socio-economic trauma. In the Indian limited series Jubilee, partition violence and the predicament of refugees is explored through characters on the show. What the show also illustrates is the partition of Indian cinema itself. The 1947 partition caused a migration of talent between two new nations. This historical event affected film production as many great performers had to make a difficult choice about their location. Two major film centers in undivided India were destabilized, Bombay and Lahore. It was a tense time, with growing confusion, insecurity, fear, and high expectations. And members of the Indian film industry in the 1940s were not exempt from these emotions. Many Muslim actors and musicians left for Pakistan. In contrast, there was an influx of talent to Bombay. Filmmakers, actors, and music composers traveled to Bombay to establish roots in the city of dreams. Many now legendary Bollywood stars and artists were actually born in cities that are now a part of Pakistan. An already established glamorous film star of the 1930s and 1940s named Noor Jahan left the Bombay film industry for Pakistan. Despite being a hugely successful leading lady in Indian films at the time, this migration of once prominent and established talent allowed for rising stars to take their place. It is obvious that the partition and its consequences loomed large over the Bombay film industry. For many years after partition, there were no Hindi movies that overtly addressed the horrors that people experienced. In later depictions on the subject, Indian filmmakers mostly explored the event through a character's point of view. Jubilee does something similar, and in this video essay, I want to discuss Jubilee's depiction of partition and other topics that this episode deals with. Episode 2 of Jubilee starts with Binod really feeling himself as Madan Kumar. His wife doesn't seem to recognize him at this point. He is now talent at Roy Talkies and has better accommodation, better clothing, and is definitely earning more than when he worked behind the scenes at Roy Talkies. Despite securing this opportunity, Binod has a lot working against him. His biggest critic is the Roy Talkies financier and businessman Shamsher Singh Walia. He is totally against Binod becoming a film hero. He calls him a worker and a fool and basically not good looking enough to be a film hero. Shamsher Singh Walia does not really think much of Binod, and neither does Sumitra Kumari. This is a huge problem for Binod. Hello, I'm Tass and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is an analysis and review of episode 2 of the Indian limited series on Amazon Prime, Jubilee. In this video, I kind of want to focus on a few topics that the episode brings up. The first is partition and how did partition affect Bombay cinema in particular. I also want to discuss investors in Bombay Talkies, and finally I want to deal with theatre companies and their influence on Bombay cinema. So let's begin. While Jubilee has Shamsher Singh Walia, the real-life Bombay Talkies had many other options available to them. Despite having German connections to possibly fund his films, Himanshu Rai targeted Indian entrepreneurs, Indian royals, and rich Indian professionals as investors for his films in India. They were usually from the Parsi community in Bombay. Because Bombay Talkies was a public limited company, it was seen as a legitimate studio. Bombay Talkies was a separate legal entity with shareholders and a board. It was very professionally run, so any stigma that was usually attached to movies and show business was overcome in this way. In this scene, Shrikant Roy mentions that 2 of his films gave him a golden and diamond jubilee. So this is the namesake of the show, and I think it's worth exploring what Jubilee meant in the Indian film industry and what the show is actually referring to, because it's not really something that we are familiar with today. A movie celebrating its jubilee was a big deal in the past. This term was used for films that ran continuously in theaters for a specific time. It was to note their achievement as having a jubilee run. If a film had a 25-week run, it celebrated a silver jubilee. If a film had a 50-week run, it celebrated a golden jubilee. If a film had a 60 to 75-week run, it celebrated a diamond jubilee. And if a film had a 75 to 200-week run, it celebrated a platinum jubilee. The jubilee run really started in the 1930s. This was a time before streaming streaming services, piracy, and modern cinema multiplexes. Over the past 110 years, Indian cinema has evolved in a myriad of ways. This includes how the industry measures success and celebrates it. From the 1930s, Jubilee milestones were the measure of success for a film, but from the 1980s onward, there was a shift due to a changing exhibition landscape. Ultimately, the shift from Jubilee milestones to weekend box office headlines reflects how the business of cinema has accelerated. In an era of wide releases, instant audience reactions, and shorter theatrical windows, success is now measured in speed rather than longevity. While silver and golden jubilees once symbolized sustained word of mouth and cultural staying power, today's celebrations are built around opening day momentum and record-breaking weekend totals. Interestingly, there was an actor named Rajendra Kumar whose films were so successful in the 1960s that his nickname was Jubilee Kumar. There is also this moment in the scene where Sumitra is talking to Shrikant and she tells him that Binod is not a Jamshed and women would understand the difference between the two men. Shrikant knows at this point that Jamshed is dead, yet he still makes some remark about her love affair with Jamshed and she replies with, "You're a disgusting man." From this we can tell that despite being married, their relationship is broken down and they are mostly partners at Roy Talkies. And this is not unlike Himanshu Rai and Devika Rani and the progression of their relationship. So I dealt a little bit with their relationship in my review and analysis of episode 1 of Jubilee. I will put the link to that in the description box below. There are a few reasons why Himanshu Rai and Devika Rani's relationship broke down. Some film historians speculate that this change started when Devika discovered that Himanshu Rai had a child and a love affair with a German woman named Mary Hainlen before he had met her, and he did not tell her about it. Another reason was due to Himanshu Rai physically abusing Devika Rani while they were married. There are letters that she wrote to her paramour at the time, Svetoslav Rorik, where she describes the domestic violence she experienced at the hands of her then husband. Also, there were rumors that Himanshu Rai was not a faithful husband to Devika Rani. In this episode, Sumitra is still searching for Jamshed Khan and Jay Khanna. Jay Khanna, played by Sidhant Gupta, is now a refugee who came to Bombay from Karachi. He desperately wants to provide for his family and he has this dream of being a director. His character represents the many struggling artists of film industries who, despite all odds, want to achieve their dreams. He is a very fascinating and flawed character, someone who is very ambitious, but he is driven by his emotions. He is such a dreamer at heart, and that's what makes him very likable. Jay's father owned a theatre company in Karachi called Khanna Theatre Company. Jay's theatre background is very significant in relation to Bollywood and the origins of Bombay cinema. Before talkies and silent films, theatre was the major source of entertainment in the region. Many drama companies sprouted all over India, catering to different regions and dialects. For example, the flourishing Parsi theatre communities and the Bengali theatre communities. Most academics agree that the theatrical predecessor of what we know as Bombay cinema was the so-called Parsi theatre. Parsi communities have a very rich history in Bombay in particular, and they were a well-represented community in the world of commerce and in the performing arts. Today, Indian actors like Tara Sutaria and Boman Irani are a part of this community. Parsi theatre groups had begun to mushroom in Bombay in the middle of the 19th century. Their repertoire was highly eclectic with influences from local folk traditions, Indo-Persian literature and Shakespearean plays. Clearly, the hybrid Parsi theatre provided the most important pool of film actors, directors and exhibitors in the pioneering years of Bombay cinema. The interpolation of music and dance sequences breaking up the plot, which was to become an essential Bollywood characteristic after the introduction of sound film in the early 1930s, was a stylistic device already used in most Parsi plays half a century earlier. There were many other connections between Bombay drama and Bombay cinema as well. Film directors recruited the bulk of the actors during the pioneering decades from Parsi theatre companies. So basically many stage actors got quickly absorbed into silent cinema. And there is a lady I would like to discuss at the end of this video. She has a very fascinating story and she has a very interesting connection to Indian independence. By the early 1940s, most of the big theatre companies closed down or turned to making films for better money. Many actors who were smart enough to adapt to cinema managed to to fit in as singers come actors before the playback era turned the phase of the film industry. Those who couldn't adapt to these rapid changes were left behind or eventually faded out of public memory. In the refugee camp, Jay agrees to murder a man for some money to help his sick brother. The partition of British India serves as a backdrop to the stories unfolding in Jubilee and how each character is forever changed by it. A few years ago, I visited the Partition Museum in Amritsar with my family, and it's one of the most heartbreaking museums I've ever been to. The partition of India, it was so violent. Many people never reached their destination. There was also gender-based violence during this time. Women were abducted, assaulted, and killed. The objective of this museum is to remember the victims and to tell the stories of those who survived. The museum does not allow for any video or photography inside, so I don't have any footage inside the museum. It's definitely a place I would suggest people go to. It's a very tragic part of history from the Indian subcontinent. Jubilee indirectly illustrates the violence and heartbreak of partition through the characters of Jay Khanna, who loses his livelihood and becomes a refugee, and Jamshed Khan, who loses his life. Indian cinema was in a major state of flux at the time of partition. Partition really affected the economy of the Indian subcontinent as a whole, and this included film industries. Many Muslim musicians, screenwriters, actors, and directors who worked at Bombay film studios prior to partition left for the newly created state Pakistan. This left a void in the Bombay film industry that really took time to fill. In 1952, the Pakistani government banned Indian films to an extent. This meant that a major part of the audience that usually consumed Hindi cinema or Bombay cinema was no longer able to. But what was really working against the Bombay film industry at the time of partition was the general distrust of the industry by political leaders. Before independence, early Hindi cinema did deal with topics like national unity of Indian people and social reform, and these themes became even more significant after the end of British colonial rule in 1947. But despite this, Gandhi and the new Indian political leadership openly expressed their distrust of cinema. This resulted in other art forms receiving government support after partition, but this did not really include Indian cinema. After partition, the Indian film industry was relegated to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Instead of the huge government subsidies pumped into, quote, high culture, unquote, the ministry and most provincial authorities rationed the distribution of raw film stock, restricted the construction of new film houses, and continued to levy high entertainment taxes, partly as a result of the limited support of the cinematic industry of the Indian state. Most of the companies that dominated the scene in the interwar years no longer existed by the mid-1950s. New forms of financing and production were about to replace the studio system. At the real-life Bombay Talkies, the inspiration for the Roy Talkie studio featured in Jubilee, many stars signed to the studio left for Pakistan. This included the 1940s Indian actress Swaran Lata, who was a find of Devika Rani. The 1947 partition also delayed the production of the film Mughal-e-Azam, with a major investor in the film leaving for Pakistan as well. The 1947 partition and Indian independence had a major impact on the types of movies made in the 1940s and 1950s. Despite the horrors of partition, there was a lot of hope for the future of a newly independent India. Many films released immediately after partition reflected this tone. It was only about 4 to 5 decades later when people came out with their tragic experiences of being displaced from their homes, and these were then recreated on the silver screen. Cinema is arguably the most popular form of media in both India and Pakistan, but to what extent can popular cinema take on the burden of recreating historical events accurately? The point of view of an individual and the human perspective seems to be the narrative of choice for most Indian filmmakers when tackling the subject of partition. Recurring themes like separated lovers, separated family members, feuding families, and loss of lives, property, livelihood, honor, and humanity is common in these films. So a love story would usually form the basis of a film, and more universal values would be at the forefront of a film, while more sensitive political topics would form the backdrop of a film. According to Indian academic and cinema studies scholar Ira Bhaskar, the film work on Partition really began after 1984. She divides work on Partition in Indian cinema into 3 phases. The first phase is the initial 15 years after the partition. The common narratives in films were migration, abducted women, and their recovery. The second phase, the common narratives in films dealt with repressed emotions and issues in society. The third and last phase is the 1990s. During this time, subjects that were considered taboo for nearly 40 years were talked about more openly in films. From the 2000s, there was a major shift, and the topic of partition was more directly dealt with in mainstream Bollywood cinema. In 2003, an Indo-Pakistani film dealt with the subject of partition with the film Khamosh Pani or Silent Waters, starring Kiran Kher. The first ever Pakistani movie on the subject of partition was the film Khattar Singh in 1959. The black and white Punjabi film made the audience, mainly in the Punjabi-speaking belt, relate to the theme, set against a rural backdrop. The movie introduces the audience to a pre-partition village, which later becomes part of post-colonial India. Punjab and Bengal faced the major brunt of the partition, and Punjab was mainly rural agrarian land. In Jubilee, the plight of the refugee is explored through the character of Khanna, who is from Punjab. Partition cinema and media often invest heavily in the private sphere of emotions and family relations. What Jubilee does that other films and forms of media haven't so far is subtly explore the consequences of partition on the landscape of the Indian film industry as well. So this episode also follows Nilofer's tumultuous journey to Bombay, but I'm going to focus on her in an upcoming analysis video. There's a lot to talk about in relation to her. Episode 2 of Jubilee is titled Sangharsh, meaning struggle. It's not only the name of the fictional film that our characters are trying to make in the show, but all our characters are really going through it in this episode. There is actually a real-life Hindi movie from 1968 titled Sangharsh with leading actors Dilip Kumar and Vijayantimala. In Jubilee, you will see in the background many retro-style posters like this to add to the very retro aesthetic of the show. In every video that I do on Jubilee, I recommend something for vintage Bollywood fans or vintage film fans. And for this video, I want to recommend this book. This is the book. It's quite big. It's like a coffee table book, but so much more. It's called Bollywood in Posters by SMM Osaja. So I bought this book at an airport in India. I did not have any space in my backpack, but I had to get this book because it's really quite special and quite unique. It's a compilation of Hindi film posters from the 1930s to around the mid-2000s. So before digital posters, Bollywood posters were actually painted by artists to advertise new films. They developed a particular style that really catered to the sensibilities of the Indian moviegoer. This book not only contains pictures of the vintage posters, it also has details on the film, like the actors, the director, and the poster artist, and how significant the film was. It's a very interesting part of vintage Indian film history and definitely worth adding to your book collection if you have an interest in vintage films and vintage Bollywood films in particular. This scene in episode 2 is perhaps one of the best scenes in Jubilee. In the first episode, I said that we are going to choose the best scene in the show. This is definitely a nominee. This is the scene where Binod has to perform as Madan Kumar, and he is on the set and he's haunted by Jamshed Khan. In the scene, the ghost of Jamshed Khan, or more likely Binod's hallucination, however you want to view it, is basically mocking and laughing at Binod, who is unable to remember his lines. I actually consider Jamshed in this scene as an expression of Binod's subconscious and his guilty conscience. He knows that he took this opportunity and this role from an innocent and talented person for his own gain. There is a German director in this scene. He is referred to as Joseph Saab by another character in the scene, and this has real parallels with Bombay Talkies. The German film director Franz Osten collaborated with Himanshu Rai on many film projects in the 1920s, and then he relocated to India to work at Bombay Talkies in the 1930s. In fact, he was the director for most of Devika Rani's films. Despite having many British, Indian, and German employees at Bombay Talkies, there were two very significant German men who worked at Bombay Talkies: director Franz Osten and cinematographer Joseph Wershing. These two German men collaborated with Himanshu Rai and Devika Rani on many projects. In this scene, Binod is under an immense amount of pressure. Earlier in this episode, he was exposed to the criticisms of the financier Shamsher Singh Walia. It really makes makes sense that he is very nervous. This is a very high pressure situation for Binod and he's kind of losing it. And the film role unfortunately runs out when Binod is finally getting the hang of performing. The background score in this scene is very good. It really adds to the pressure. Finally, it is Shrikant who has to speak to Binod and basically tells him that they cannot afford to keep the set another day, so he has to make it work. I thought that the creative decision to not show Binod's one good take and just to show the reactions of the other characters and a close-up of the camera was excellent. It was a very interesting way of relaying to the viewer that Binod finally did it. You have to follow each reaction of each character to know if Binod is actually doing well. It really kept me on edge. I love this scene. We then finally see the very sinister side of Sumitra when she destroys Binod's one okay take. But she finally realizes that Binod is going to be a real adversary when he manages to splice together the film to create a final cut, and that is what they present at this party. The episode ends with a lot of gravitas. The iconic Tryst with Destiny speech delivered by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru is a part of this scene. It's played as the scene unfolds. We then see these fleeting clips indicating India celebrating independence from British colonial rule. So what I want to talk about here is that on the eve, this is actually real, on the eve of India's independence in 1947, the iconic Tryst with Destiny speech was on All India Radio at midnight. And at 20 minutes past 12 midnight, a woman sang Vande Mataram, which is independent India's national anthem. And I want to talk about this woman because she has a very interesting history that relates to stage and screen. The woman who became famous for singing India's national anthem that night was this woman named Hirabai Borodkar, and she was an Indian classical singer and actress of the stage and screen. I wish Jubilee referenced her in some way in this scene. It was a missed opportunity because she was a classical singer, a theatre actress, and a film actress in the 1930s. It was quite obvious a choice for many theatre actors to turn to cinema. This led to Hirabai acting in a few films in the mid-1930s. In 1934, she acted in a talkie, Swarna Mandi, Pratibha in 1937, Janabai in 1938, Municipality in 1941, and a documentary film Lalat in 1947, produced by Nav Jankar Films Bombay. She accepted roles in Marathi films as well. With her stunning looks and singing that could send audiences in raptures, Hirabai fit the roles perfectly. Although she is remembered mostly as a classical singer, she was also an actress of the stage and screen. This episode ends in this amazing scene with all the characters celebrating India's independence and their paths basically cross. The overall tone of the final scene in this episode is celebratory for most characters, and this was definitely a reflection of the feelings of most people on the 15th of August 1947. Many Indian celebrities of the time in Mumbai were out celebrating Indian independence, and the show provides somewhat of an ode to stories from that night. 24 hours prior to independence, people were definitely euphoric. They were out on the streets, in trams and buses. There was a smile on everyone's faces. Even the movie stars could not escape the contagious excitement. Reports suggest that Devanand took his car out and drove all around Churchgate in it, while Baburao Patel of the Film India fame hosted a very big party at his residence, attended by many well-known celebrities at the time. The show definitely captured this feeling. But the character going through the greatest struggle is Jay Khanna. There is this cliffhanger when Jay stands before the man he's meant to kill, and that is how the episode ends. Thank you for watching, guys. I will see you in my review and analysis of episode 3 of Jubilee. I think we're going to focus a lot on music in that episode. Let me know which character narrative is the most intriguing for you at this point in the show. For me, it's between Binod and Jay Khanna. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.